Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Alexis Wadley. In recent years, Los Angeles County has been under fire because of problems with the foster care system. Back in 2013, LA Times reporter Garrett Theroff found that children in foster homes overseen by private agencies are 1/3 more likely to be physically, mentally, or sexually abused than children in county-sanctioned homes. Theroff says California's private foster care system has become more expensive and dangerous than the government-run homes it has replaced. In 2013, California children made up 1 in 3 of the children in foster care nationwide. Nearly 20,000 children are in the Los Angeles system alone. Orange County supports 2,300 children, and San Diego County has 3,400 children in foster homes. Last year, a Blue Ribbon Commission declared a state of emergency in LA County's child welfare system. The county has since agreed to some changes. It will provide medical nurses to go with social workers checking on child abuse reports and to raise stipends for relatives who take in foster children. Brenda Garcia has more on the story.
Thank you, Alexis. I'd like to welcome my guest, Bob Levy, LA County Recruiter for S.H.A.R.E organization, and Dr. Roxanne Moschetti, Child and Adolescent Development Professor here at CSUN. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
My first question is for both of you, but we'll start off with Dr. Moschetti. Los Angeles has the highest number of foster children compared to all other counties in California. DCFS approximates there's probably around 30,000 children in foster care in just LA alone. Why is this number so high?
That's a really good question. I don't think anyone has an easy answer for that, because the reasons that the reasons that children or adolescents go into foster care they vary. So it could be anything from abuse to neglect to any reason that a parent cannot care for their own child. So it might be the parent is incarcerated. It could be all the way even if the parent gets into a fight. If there's domestic violence in the home and both parents are separated from each other, and the child might be just removed at the time temporarily. So LA County is huge as well. So, I mean, as a researcher, I would look at it and make that assumption that we would have a high number. That's my best answer. Do you have an exact?
Well, I don't know exactly the reason either, but I can tell you that drugs are usually always involved with kids that get placed in the foster care system. So I'd say the drug culture has a lot to do with it, and of course domestic violence as well.
I can add on to that too, yeah. Because abuse, neglect, the ones that I named, typically if you study those things, there are other factors that go hand in hand, which are addiction, substance use, mental illness. So when you're looking at counties and looking at foster care rates within them, you'd also want to look at the other things, so poverty levels, socioeconomic status, substance use, and things like that, because those all go hand in hand. When you have people living below the poverty line, abusing substances, then you're going to have higher rates of abuse, neglect, and parents unable to care for their children.
Okay. And Dr. Moschetti, for our listeners who don't know the history, how did the foster care system come into being? I mean, there was there used to be orphanages, but I mean, do those still even exist, or what's the deal with those?
Modern day would say orphanages do not exist. There's a stigma kind of attached to that term now, because when we think about orphanages, we think of maybe 50 babies in a room unattended. I mean, that seems to be kind of the common conception. Foster cares were put into place in order to temporarily or long-term house children, even infants, and all the way through adolescents, in any, like I said kind of before, in any sort of predicament where their parents are unable to care for them, with the hope that they will return back to their parents. That's the hope. But what we see, which we'll probably get into, is that oftentimes kids end up staying there longer.
Okay.
I have a really good story about that, if I could. Sure. And because I'm fascinated with it. Actually, in the industrial age, when all the immigrants were coming to New York, it was very overcrowded, and orphanages were very overcrowded. Kids were dying in orphanages. And the orphan train, I don't know if you've ever heard of that term, the orphan train started about the mid-1800s and started saying we have to get these kids into healthy homes, and started putting them on trains to the Midwest. And they found families there. Something between 100,000 to maybe 400,000 children got placed, and it ended about the time of the Depression. So about 75-year span, they were putting kids on orphan trains and getting them to the Midwest, and that's how the foster care system got started way back then.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
This question's also for both of you. We'll start with Bob. Being placed in a foster home can be a very traumatic experience for any child. Are these traumas carried on forever? And what does it look like when these children become adults that are still carrying these traumas from their childhood?
Well, I was a child in foster care myself for a short span, thankfully. But I can tell you that, yeah, from my experience with my own children that we fostered and adopted, and all the families and children that we deal with, there will always be that wound. And that trauma will always be there. Even if the child was placed as an infant, there's a trauma that goes on inside the womb of abandonment. And that child will always deal with those situations and those feelings.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Developmentally, what a lot of people talk about when we're looking at the effects of foster care on development, we really focus on a lot of attachment. So, and that's kind of what you're talking about too. So, depending on the reasons that have brought the children into the foster home will also kind of, if it's abuse, if it's severe abuse or neglect, most oftentimes hand in hand you're going to have, they haven't formed secure attachments with their caregivers. In that span either. And then if, depending on where they're placed, oftentimes we see kids moved, like maybe they'll go back to their parents and then they'll be taken away again and they'll in a different foster care. So they continue those insecure attachments with adults. And so that can carry on long term, as well as any sort of trauma that they're exposed to. It's really big on counseling and preventative measures where you're going in and working with the families and aiding them in dealing with whatever sort of things that they're faced against.
Okay. Even though some children may get adopted, there are times where these adoptees can manifest anger, regardless if they're living in better conditions. Can you just explain to us, like, what can this anger be coming from?
I can kind of, I wanted to piggyback too, because I was a child of the foster care system as well for 13 years, on and off. So speaking from my own personal anecdotal experience, regardless of how bad your home is, there's some sort of tie to it and some sense of animosity or resentment when you are removed from it. Whether it's a really, really chaotic environment or not, that's what's home to you. So these, oftentimes, even if they're nice and they have really caring people, it feels foreign. And so that's just an anecdotal, there's no like scientific research to back this that I've actually found. But oftentimes it's also coming down to the attachments again. So if they haven't formed secure attachments with the adoptive parents, that might also form a problem. And if they don't, our theory would say if you don't form secure attachments as an infant, you will struggle with forming secure attachments throughout adolescence and then your adulthood. So that would also play a role in how attached they felt to their adoptive parents as well. So that would be kind of my answer.
That's very true, because they do romanticize and fantasize about their mom or dad coming to get them at some point. And I know I did as a child in foster care, and every child does, and it's very true. Whether your family was living under a bridge or whatever, that's where you want to be. And so we tell our families, and we've practiced that we've always incorporated their family into our situation. I think it's the most devastating thing is when you keep that information. A lot of families will keep that information until the child's 18 about their biological family, and that's devastating because now it has become their quest. And say, for instance, their parents are dead or they don't care anymore. They've lived all this time waiting for that day to find their family, and the day comes and it's not what they expected, and it's just extremely devastating on the child. They really go into a tailspin emotionally. So yeah, we try to encourage our families, let them know they're adopted, let them know all about that, try to be as open with that biological family as possible within the boundaries of safety, because that's going to be so important to the child.
Okay. I want to ask you both of you this question as well. Is this a cycle? Do these foster children grow up to become parents that also have a difficult time being a good parent?
It's a really good question. And oftentimes we see that, unfortunately, if they come in because of extreme abuse or neglect, if you look at longitudinal studies on children who were abused or neglected, unfortunately, oftentimes they do become abusers. But again, going back to those factors that are always kind of there, it's because of substance abuse or possible mental illness, living below the poverty line. Again, those things are always usually kind of in place there. So what happens is they are abused and neglected as children, and then that's how there's a variety of different outcomes, but one of them is too, that's how they learn to relate to people. If I always use an example of, we used to fight when we were young with our family, and we would always scream. And so when I became a teenager and I fought with my friends, I would scream at them, which was completely not appropriate. And it took a friend saying, this is an inappropriate way of dealing with your feelings. But it's innate in you, and that's how you learn to deal with people, because it's just what you've been raised around. And so a lot of times these kids, that's how they deal with anger or frustration, is they hit each other, or they end up abusing other kids because it's been done to them. And when you look at research and even in interviews with these kids, a lot of times they say that they're just curious. They're like, it was done to me, and so I wanted to know what it felt like. And so what you see there is sometimes then they're moved from foster homes because they can't be placed. That's one of the reasons that we see kids bounce from foster homes, because the foster parents can't keep them, because they're causing problems within that foster home, if that makes sense. So yes, that's kind of a long answer, but yes, we see that oftentimes it does trickle down families and generations without proper intervention and really, really aiding the kids in understanding what happened to them and how to move forward.
Bob, do you have anything to add to?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that wrapping around them, being in a forever family, an adoptive home, is going to help them with those behaviors, because again, they are going to have those triggers in there and things like that. If they get to a point where they're in a good family that's teaching them right behaviors and how to socialize and be in a marriage and have children and all those kind of things, then things will go well. What we're finding is a lot of these kids that were placed in foster care that are having children that they're putting into foster care. They're getting into relationships before getting married and having children out of wedlock. So we have foster kids putting more kids in the foster care system, and that's really traumatic. So that's where we want to make sure they're in good families, whether it's a healed biological family or it's an adoptive family that's going to help them work through all that.
Okay. Dr. Moschetti,
I was going to add,
would you like to add something?
It's modeling too. It's like the modeling. So if you do place them in a home where they're getting that modeled appropriate behavior, a lot of times they end up forming to that. Or
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, Dr. Moschetti, this question's for you. Is it possible that some parents don't know the difference between discipline and abuse? And can you just give us some insight on what the difference between the two is?
Yeah, and I teach this a lot in my classes, because I teach a class on the developmental impacts of abuse and neglect. And what we find is, again, it's kind of just piggybacking on what I already said. They're raised in an environment where that's how anger is dealt with. And so it's completely appropriate in their homes to smack each other when they do something wrong. And so it takes a lot of education and knowing, even myself included, to redirect. Or if someone's doing something, if they're sticking their finger in a light socket, you don't hit them, you redirect them to doing something else. That takes a lot of knowledge of the psychology of children, and knowing when some other schools of thought think that punishment and negative reinforcement is what's going to get people to listen to you. So a lot of times when you work with these families, they don't think that spanking or doing the things that they're doing is actually classified as abuse. Neglect as well, the same. Mm-hmm. They don't think that not having food in the refrigerator or whatever is a form of neglect, or even withholding love or praise is also seen as a form of neglect, or not being affectionate towards your kids can be seen as a form of neglect as well. But it just takes educating parents on the consequences of what happens.
Okay. Bob, I understand you grew up in foster care. I know you shared a little bit, but can you just go a little deeper as to why you were placed in there and what it was like being raised in a foster home? Sure.
My father was a gambler, and my mother was, they divorced, and my mom wasn't emotionally able to care for me, so I ended up in foster care. And it was only for about 3 years. the experience, I had about 4 homes. I bounced. I was a pretty good kid, but I bounced 4 times in 3 years. So trying to, you know, socialize in school was very dramatic, because as soon as they knew you were a kid in foster care, the word got around, and now you're labeled. So that was very hard to deal with. And then just trying to keep up with your schoolwork is devastating, because as soon as you change the school, now it's a different curriculum, or it's a different book, or you're in a different place in the book. And so I could see where children would just give up after being moved so many times. You're just giving up because you can't keep up with that pace. I was in some good families that taught me some great things, fishing and throwing a ball and doing the things that my dad never did with me. So I had some really great homes I was in, and some that were not so great. So kind of a mixed bag.
Okay. Dr. Moschetti, I understand that you also grew up in foster care. Can you also share your experience with us?
Yeah, and I don't know if we were in foster care. There were 3 of us, and so my mom, she was homeless and mentally unstable and emotionally unable to really care for us. There was a lot of substance use, homelessness, and so if many of the reasons that we went to foster care were she was thrown into jail for a warrant, or fighting with her boyfriend, something like that, or even when she had my youngest brother, because there was no one else to care for us, they put us in a foster home too. So it was on and off a lot like that. And from my memory, it was always very foreign. And like we were saying, even if your family lives under a bridge, even though we were homeless, and even though our home was really, really chaotic, it was still familiar to me. So that chaos became a sort of, you know, like something that's on your body that you don't notice, that is really, really familiar. So when you were put into a home that you have a bed and foreign sheets, I always felt really, really uncomfortable. With kids that you didn't know, with a family that you didn't know, and even if they were good and really amazing, all I was doing was waiting for my mom to come back. Eventually, because I was doing so poorly in school, I think at 13 I had a .87 GPA, and I was on the verge of giving up. So the Child Protective Services finally removed us and did a placement with our grandparents in a different town. But it's hard, and they moved around a lot, and so that developing relationships with peers, or your own family, or teachers, or any sort of thing like that is really, really difficult and challenging.
Is there a specific age that kids pass where maybe their chances of adoption goes down?
Sure. You know, it's really when they start to get, you know, teenage years. I mean, as soon as they get junior high school, that probably is you know, if they're in elementary school, that's usually hopeful in that range. But as soon as you get junior high, you start to try to really acclimate to the culture and stuff like that. And with all the things that are going on, yeah, we find that those kids are harder to place. And if you look on the websites like Adopt Us Kids, or even going on Wednesday's Child, and things like that, you'll see that most of the children on there are a little bit older, you know, at least 11 years old on those sites. But I would say somewhere around that age, they get more difficult to place.
Why is this, do you think?
I could guess. I don't know from like a research point or the actual facts, but my guess is when most families that go in to adopt children, they want a younger child. I think that they fear adopting an older child. They're going to have developmental consequences of their upbringing more so than a younger one, which isn't necessarily true. But I think that I mean, it could be, but it doesn't mean it is 100% going to be like that. So I think that a lot of families probably stray away from adopting a teenager at that point. That'd be my best guess.
Okay, Bob, you are part of an organization called S.H.A.R.E that helps out children in foster care. Can you tell us about what exactly this organization does?
Sure. Our whole mission is to, well, we go to churches. God calls his people to care for the widow and the orphan. And so we go to churches with people and find people with a heart to take in children. And then our whole mission is to wrap around those people and make sure that we're supporting them. We believe that if we find the good family, then everything else will take care of itself as well as possible. So we really work on the side of the family. We don't place children and do all those things. We work with the family, supporting them, advocating for them, and doing all the things that they need to be good parents in the process.
And can you elaborate a little bit more on like the types of services or support that's offered to foster parents through the organization?
Oh, sure. Well, like I talked about advocacy, they usually have an agency of the county they go through, and there's a lot of advocacy needed for their rights to help them with the whole process of becoming certified as foster adopted parents. But then in supporting those children, we have support groups. We have lots of events that we do for our families to make their experience good. Parent night outs. We encourage respite care. We have Christmas parties and summer picnics and everything you can think of to, again, wrap around these parents, be that advocate for them, or that connection, that support connection. And then we link them. We have over 900 families that we serve. So that's a big network in LA that helps each other also. So we believe that's where the strength is.
Great. This question's also for both of you. We'll start with Dr. Moschetti. About a year ago, a blue ribbon panel organized by the LA Board of Supervisors declared a state of emergency in the child welfare system. But now, a recent report made by a foster care watchdog group says that LA has made real progress. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree?
That's a really good question. I think that we're trying to improve the system for sure. I think that most people that are involved in the field acknowledge that the system is flawed. There's been a variety of different things that have been put into place. I think now they've upped the age to 21. Is that correct?
That's
yes.
correct.
So what happened before was when children reached 18, they were on their own, and so they would term it aged out of foster care. And what happened is when you're 18 and you would turn 18, and they would just have to leave. They had no support whatsoever, and so that was actually acknowledged as a very unfortunate thing, and we didn't want to do that anymore. So they've now upped the age to 21, and there's a lot of different things, not just LA-wide, but California-wide. I know where they're eligible for benefits until they're 21 as well. So even if they do leave the foster home, they're able to get benefits to aid them in getting themselves on their feet. So I do think that there are strides being made. CSUN actually even has, we were talking about it earlier, the Resilient Scholar Program, which works to kind of reach out to foster care youth and help them, because only 1% of them are going to college. So I think that everyone is making a conscious effort to aid these kids in making it out of the system successfully.
Okay. Bob, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think it's getting, I think what's getting better is the attention that it's drawing and the support. The state, the county, our nation is scrambling to do things because they see what crisis we're in. About 27,000 children a year are emancipated and hit the street, whether they're 21 or 18, and they're on their own. They're going to end up either homeless, into prostitution. Human trafficking is huge right now. Incarcerated in gangs, on drugs, pregnant. So that has not gotten better. The fact that we're paying attention to it has definitely gotten better, but we are at crisis level still, and we have to do something.
Okay. What advice would you give to a child who is in foster care right now and just might be losing hope on ever becoming adopted or finding their real parents?
It depends on their background. So if they were in foster care and they didn't know who their real parents were, I would encourage them to remember why the foster care system was put into place, and to be grateful of where they were at, and kind of try to aid them in understanding the benefits of being taken away from a chaotic environment, or the consequences of if they were to be left wherever they were. Kind of just aiding and understanding. A big part of child development and the counseling field in general is really helping kids who are cognitively able to understand, depending on their age, really, really wrap their head around what's going on. So you cannot be with your mom because she abuses drugs and your home is unstable and she can't pay the rent and there's people coming in and out and something terrible can happen to you, but we can do this, or really trying to aid them in that way, because that's what was really scary as a child of the foster care system, is not understanding why things were happening. Knowing things were bad, but I didn't have answers. So I would be put into these foreign homes. I wouldn't know where my mom was and if she was okay or sad or mad or upset. And so kind of just aiding in that whole communication process and acting. I think you mentioned like working with the entire family as a whole, the foster family, the biological family, if you can find them, and the child, working together to understand what is the best option for everyone involved.
Okay. Bob, would you like to add anything to that?
I would say for the foster child that's feeling kind of hopeless, that know that they're wonderful, that God made them special and precious, and they have skills and they have talents and all those things. And just because their parents made mistakes and made bad decisions doesn't mean that they don't have a hope and a future for them. The fact that they have had to survive and go through these things would actually make them much more resilient to the pressures of the world, which is pretty big. So I would say, hang in there, have hope. You're wonderful. You're going to do well, and try to forgive your parents for what they did, but realize that has nothing to do with who you are. You're going to make it if you so choose.
What would you like other people to know maybe about foster care or kids in foster care or kids who have been adopted that you feel many don't know about?
I think my biggest piece of advice would just never underestimate your impact that you can have on them, whether how big or small. When I think about how I ended up where I am now, as opposed to where I started, it was little things like a 4th grade teacher that asked me to help her with a bulletin board after school. Really small things, or like a school nurse that, acknowledged that my handwriting was nice. It's the littlest, tiniest things that offered support to me when I was feeling unwanted or not worthy of whatever, or sad about my family. And so never to underestimate that in any capacity. And I know that some people, if they think that there's nothing I could do, I can't take a foster child, that's not true. You don't have to take a foster child, but you can volunteer your time 2 hours a week. I also volunteer at a homeless shelter, or a homeless drop-in center for teens in Hollywood. We offer services, and a lot of our teens are foster care youth that have aged out, and now they're living on the streets. And it's not much, but that's pretty much all I can do, is to work directly with the population right now. And so even if it's smiling and giving them an orange juice in the morning, that's what I'm doing, and just to kind of be a presence, and a positive presence in their life.
Okay, Bob, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that's wonderful. I think that is the big thing, is that if I can't be a foster parent or something, I can't do anything. But you can do that. Homeless, you can visit a group home, share your love with kids that won't have that family setting, and be that guy that's going to take them out for a hamburger or something, or a movie, or throw the baseball, or whatever it is so meaningful. And I think we both remember those little things that people did that made a huge difference in our life, to let us know we are special. And we do have value.
All right, well, that's all we have time for today. Again, thank you so much to both of you for being here today.
It's been a pleasure.
For having us. Look at these boots.
Man, those are nice. You should buy them.
Half the price of the real thing. Do you want them?
The production and sale of counterfeit goods cause more harm than meets the eye.
Get to work!
And the profits can fund organized crime.
So, do you want them?
Buying counterfeit products
No way.
is just not worth it.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CSUN On Point on Sunday mornings. You can also watch us on LA's Channel 36 at 11:30, and you can listen on KCSN 88.5 FM at 5:30. That's also Sunday mornings. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Alexis Wadley.